Afra, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Rennie. And for a second, I was wondering who you were talking about. You kept saying my name. So good morning and welcome to the listeners for paying attention. Thanks for inviting me.
It is always good to have you here, and your honesty and your straight-to-itiveness. I know I just created that straight-to-itiveness is welcome. You are advising citizens not to panic about the property tax issue. You said there is no need for citizens to pay money either to evaluator to assess their property.
Yes.
Why not? Explain, please.
Well, there are two things. First of all, the question about not to panic and how much is the level of detail one is required to provide. I heard the prior guest before myself was Martin Daly, senior counsel, who is of course an eminent commentator and well-known, well-respected commentator. And he was speaking about the information that was required, the photograph and all of these sorts of things. And let me just say to you that the form, which I don't think is particularly well constructed, the valuation return form, doesn't actually require the provision of those details. We need to read carefully. The form requires you to submit certain details and send them in. And the other details, and the certain details that you're required to send would be your name, your contact details, the address of the property, and one thing that would corroborate the fact that you are connected with that property. It could be the deed number. It could be your last land tax receipt. Okay? It could be a TNTech bill. I think TNTech bills were mentioned at the end of Mr. Daly's statement. But there are 13 items of information listed, which the people who are opposed to the bill are using that list of 13 items to excite a certain type of discussion. So we have 13 items like planning permissions and completion certificates and photographs of the property and sketches of the property and so on and so on. And let's be really clear, those 13 items are merely requested. One, the citizens are being requested, and there's a difference between required and requested. The citizens are being requested to submit as many of those as possible.
So it is not as onerous as folks think it is.
It suits certain people to make a fish look like an egg. But those of us who have sense and who went to school and stayed awake, a fish is a fish and an egg is an egg. Those documents are merely requested. The more information you provide, the easier it will be for the authorities, the valuation commissioner, to perform their work because they have a greater level of detail. But they are not required. So that's the first point, Rennie.
Stay on that point for me for a moment, because Senior Counsel Daly, who you, like I, highly respect, his column today speaks of folks entering your premises and the disquiet in that area.
I'll come to that, yeah. So the second thing I want to say is that the question about people entering homes, let's just understand the methodology here. There are stages in this process. The first stage, which is where we are now, is that people are being requested to provide certain information, and there's a very limited constructive information that they're being required to provide. Once that information is in, and Daly did mention it about different types of properties and bands of property and so on and so on. He mentioned it in the column and he mentioned it on the radio. Once those things are in, the property is likely to be allocated to a band, and the methodology that is likely to be employed is going to be what is called a mass valuation. In other words, let's be quite clear. The first valuations that are being done when you get your bill, which is called an assessment, a notice of assessment, which is an estimated bill. When you get that bill, that will be on the basis of a mass valuation. Okay? And a mass valuation will be carried out because, in fact, let's make the example. Rennie, you live at number 22 Mango Alley. And they have 42 houses on Mango Alley, 35 of whom completed the forms. They have aerial photography of Mango Alley. They have TNTech bills of Mango Alley. They have WASA reports of Mango Alley. There's a considerable pool of data they can draw on. And they can actually say that, in fact, the average house in Mango Alley rents for $4,000 a month. And issue an estimated bill that says to you, your bill was estimated, because from the photography and so on, your house appears to be the same in the footprint as the other houses. Your bill is also estimated as if your rent was $4,000 a month. There are two things that will happen. First of all, there are people who will not complete the forms, either because they forgot or as a sense of protest. And then secondly, there will be people whose properties don't conform to the normal property in Mango Alley. So you may have a house that's twice as big. Or you may have a neighbor who says, well, in fact, his house appears to be the same on aerial photography, but it's 2 stories. We all have flat houses here. And Mr. Rennie B is that big guy on the radio DJ. He has a 2-story house. His house bill can't be the same as my house bill. It is in those exceptional cases that the Commissioner of Valuations will employ the power. He has a power at any time he chooses, but it's only in those exceptional cases he would employ his discretion, his power, just to call Mr. Rennie B and say, Mr. Rennie B, you submitted papers here to us, and we need to visit this property to check certain things. Okay? Now again, in terms of citizens' rights and protest, a citizen could give them an appointment and go out. You could say, come Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock, and then come to the radio station and have them waiting down there. You could do all of that, but the fact is, ultimately, they will issue an assessment to you.
Yes, if you don't comply, if they cannot do validation, then they will say, okay, it's almost the same thing like they do with your electrical bill. I can't get to your meter all the time. Okay, I'm going to assume this is your use. Okay.
And if you are then going to become aggrieved by that assessment and try to take up an appeal process, your scope within the appeal is going to be influenced by the fact that maybe you didn't complete the form properly or honestly. Maybe when they were trying to check, you didn't go along with them, and now you're coming to the court, and if you're coming to the court, you ought to come in some clean hands, having made an attempt to give the proper information for the exercise to take place. So those are some of the things. Yes, indeed, people have been hired. Yes, indeed, there's a fear of crime and so on. Nobody could deny those things. But the reality is that the process that is going to be employed to do 90-something% of the evaluations is a mass process. In other words, a kind of a curbside process, I think was the phrase that was used a short while ago. A curbside or remote control process. And in exceptional cases, where there's some sort of justification, they would be exercising their power to see the property.
I got that. Yeah. So that lays some of the fear that's expressed in Mr. Daly's column. Let's go on. Let's go on with this whole area. How is property tax calculated or based?
Well, in Trinidad and Tobago, the formula that is laid out in the Property Tax Act 2009, it revolves around the rental value of the property, which is calculated, is estimated. It is then adjusted. There's a standard adjustment applied to reflect a concept known as voids. And the voids concept in the Property Tax Act is 10% is allocated for voids. The void concept is one in which we understand that landlords, as an average, never collect a full month's rent every month. And that indeed, apart from the fact of tenants not paying or paying late, bounce checks and all these things, you also have the question of the expenses of owning a property. Okay? So when you put all of that into the pot, in the round, as it were, you take 10% off. So you make an adjustment. So you say that, in fact, someone owning that property would have a rental income that is 90% of what is the stated rent. Yes, and then you calculate the tax on a basis of that. I think in commercial cases it's 5%, in residential cases it's 3%, and so on and so on. So one of the questions people have raised, Rennie and listeners, is the question of why did we do an approach that takes, and I'm saying we because it's a profession, why did we do an approach that takes account of rental value as opposed to capital values? And that's an important point for people to understand. First of all, in terms of just the sheer availability of information, there is a lot more rentals taking place in terms of the actual transactions taking place in a typical year than sales. Okay? So you would have a situation, I could give examples. There are particular neighborhoods I know. I mean, I'm a practicing valuer. There are particular neighborhoods I know, and large neighborhoods of hundreds of properties, that sometimes you go to these neighborhoods to do a valuation. And there was one neighborhood I could remember, colleagues who are listening will know what I'm talking about, where for 3 years, recently, there was only one sale. There was only one arm's length sale, where somebody who didn't know that person sold to somebody they didn't know a property that fit into the houses in the neighborhood. Okay. So those of us who were performing valuations in that last 3-year period in that neighborhood had to do all kinds of calculations to figure out what is the value you're going to put on this property or that property if you've only had one sale. And we now have a few more sales, so it's become a little easier. Having said that, in that same neighborhood where there was a challenge of only one sale in 3 years, in that same neighborhood, over that 3-year period, there were scores of rentals. because it's the type of neighborhood that people own investment property.
Right.
So this is the sort of internal considerations that one would have in preparing an approach to the question of doing a valuation exercise like this. What is the availability of information? Does one take up an approach that in fact appears to be satisfactory but leaves you as the administrator of the approach with a lack of information? So we took up an approach that actually gives a certain quantity and quality of information. So the question was that's why rental was used as an approach. I also have to say that in terms of equity and soft landings and hard landings and shocks and so on, that is my belief that the ratio between rents and capital values in Trinidad and Tobago is such that a rental approach is actually a softer approach than if we had done a capital approach. That's just my professional opinion.
Differentiating, we detail that as we go, because this is nothing new to those who were paying taxes before, I believe, 2013, because essentially that has not changed. But for those who are in the tax net for the first time, understanding the acronyms is going to be important. We are looking at the ARV, which is the annual rental value. Detail that, please, for our listeners.
Well, first of all, let me just make a minor correction, Rennie, that in fact the property tax was last paid in our country. It was in two forms. There was land and building taxes, and there was house rates. The last year it was paid was December of 2009 was the last year.
09, yes, 09, yes. Thank you.
But the annual rental value is the value for which a property would rent between a willing renter and a willing landlord. Who have good knowledge of the market at arm's length, okay, on a month-to-month tenancy, that sort of thing, and a year-to-year tenancy, sorry, not month-to-month, year-to-year.
I got you. And thanks for the correction. It was, as you
09,
said, 09, that's correct. Yeah. The ARV.
No, that was the ARV.
That's the ARV. The ATV.
The ATV is as I said earlier on, as I indicated earlier on, the ATV, the annual taxable value, is calculated by adjusting the ARV by this 10% deduction, which we call voids, which takes account of the occasions when tenants don't pay and the sort of just the costs of ownership of owning an apartment or a building of apartments and so on.
I got you. 5 minutes away from 11 o'clock. Sure. Afra Raymond is the voice that you're hearing. Afra is a survey and managing director at Raymond and Pear Limited. And we are just talking and getting clear a number of things that's in the public domain. The ministry says the following, that there are 4 factors which will decide property values. Can you get to those for me? I know location of the property is one, clarification of the property.
Go on, tell me what they say.
You said location of the property is one, clarification of the property. There's also category of the property, dimensions, and modifications.
Yeah, well, those are 4 useful guidelines. Location is the biggest one, obviously. In fact, when I first started studying valuation, we had a bit of a corny one. I have to give you all one corny one at least. And that was that there were 3 factors to do with the valuation of every property. And in our lessons, there were location, and location. So in fact, location was considered to be very, very important.
Yes.
And then of course, there's the size and the quality of the property and whether the property has been modified. As I said in the example earlier on, Rennie, I made a fictitious example of the famous DJ Rennie B living on a street, having a house that aerially had the same footprint as the other houses on the street, but of course he had prospered, so it was 2 stories high.
Sometimes I reinforce something to make a point. I got your point.
Thanks. So yeah, those are the valuation factors that one would bear in mind.
Let's talk about vacant land. Will vacant land be taxed?
Yes.
Yes, because it's property.
Yeah, it is property.
It's not about a building, it's about a property.
And people who are not practitioners in the market may not be aware of it, but vacant land is rented. Whether it's for car parking or for drainage or for agriculture, vacant land is rented.
I see no reason why it
has a rental value.
Before I go into a couple of the other areas I have that I need you to delineate and make clearer to our listeners on, I want to get your position, almost rhetorically. I want to get your position on property tax.
Yes, I support it. Absolutely. I mean, there's a couple of small things, significant things I should say that I would mention. The first thing I would mention is that in fact, I think, and I said this at the beginning, back in 2009, going into 2010, when Mr. Patrick Manning was the Prime Minister, the late Mr. Patrick Manning, and Karen Nunes Teixeira was the Minister of Finance. I made the point then, and I'll make the point again, that the property tax ought to be paid over to the local government bodies for the provision and the funding of local government services. It ought not to be, in my opinion, retained in the consolidated fund by the central government. And let me be really clear on something here, because sometimes people may have a degree of misunderstanding on this question. The fact that, let us make an example. Let's say Tunapuna Piako Regional Corporation. Let's talk about a place where many of us live. It's a very heavily populated part of the country. Tunapuna Piako Regional Corporation, or like Trinity and so on, is down there. Now, let's suppose Tunapuna Piako Regional Corporation is making $75 or $85 million a year in property tax. I'm just calling a figure. And that people were to go along with my proposal. That money that the central government collects should be sent back to Tunapuna Piako Regional Corporation, 75 or 85 million US. TT. Let's say 75 million TT. It does not mean, let's be clear what we mean and what we don't mean. It does not mean that Tunapuna Piako Regional Corporation will have 75 million more to spend. Let's be really clear. What is happening is that there's a certain budget for Tunapuna Piako Regional Corporation. A budget, let us say, of 200 million. At the moment, the way things are run right now, all of that money, virtually 99% of that money, comes from central government. And there's a degree of political control from the center in terms of how the Tunapuna Piako Regional Corporation handles its affairs.
Because I disperse the funds, so I can direct as to how it's spent. Yes.
Yeah, who pays the piper and so on. What I am proposing is a scenario in which that 75 million TT, roughly 33% of the money going to Tunapuna Piako, would be funded from their own property tax. So there will be a degree of autonomy, and a degree of autonomy is what it is this proposed call is about. It's not about increasing the money from 200 million to 275 million. Let's be clear on that.
There are a lot of people who are in concert with you on that, on the area of the whatever is collected in property tax should go to the city corporation. But we need a whole revamping of that, and that is something that the government has promised to do, but it has not been done. So in the interim, at least it seems that way from the statement of the Prime Minister, the money will be collected, go into the hands of the Exchequer, and it will be sent out. You were saying that you would like to see specifics inside of here that say whatever is collected. So who collects this money, first of all? Is it the central government going to collect this money? Because if the central government collects this money and then has to pass it back to the city corporation, then I would expect that we're going to have a collection fee. The central government.
Well, they would have something, But I think at the moment the proposal is that the money is collected by the Minister of Finance.
And it's going to be kept with the Exchequer until we get the city corporation situation taken care of.
Clarified, But at the moment the proposal is that those funds are kept in the consolidated fund, and I'm not in support of that. The other thing I want to say about property tax, so that was a criticism. Let me give you a very positive thing about the property tax and what is really, in my opinion, behind a lot of the opposition to it. The big unintended effect of the property tax will be this. For the property tax to work, there has to be a database that allows people to see what other people's assessment is. Okay, the system is self-policing. Okay? It is, in fact, to use today's internet language, it is crowdsourced. Okay? Which means that, in fact, if I was sitting on this side of the street, Rennie, in Mango Terrace, and my assessment is for $2,000 a year, and I am seeing you across the street from me with a house twice my size, and your assessment is also $2,000 a year, something is wrong. And your house is twice my size. Either my numbers come down by half, or your numbers go up by twice, or something. But officials have to come to your house to check and see the true measurements of your house. And that degree
of transparency is what
of transparency, citizen oversight, some could call it whistleblower, that degree of the exchange of information, which in modern world we call crowdsourcing. When we use an application like Waze, okay, that allows us to figure out how to get from here to Mount St. Benedict, or from here to some particular festival taking place in Grand Riviere. How Waze works is that they set down a basic template, And the number of us in Trinidad and Tobago who are traveling from here to there and from there to here, know the shortcut to go from so by so. We put that information into this crowdsourced thing that we call Waze. And it benefits us all because there's a higher level of information. Not always 100% correct, but there's a higher level of information that allows us all to traverse the roads with a greater degree of options and a greater degree of accuracy. And it's that principle that the whole thing is working on. The point I'm coming to in terms of taxation and the fear and the strong opposition to the tax is this. Is that at this moment in time, there isn't a record of who owns what in this country. There isn't a record of who owns how many rental properties and what is the rent that they pay.
That's right.
And the property tax system, the property tax proposals, the property tax implementation will put those things as a firm reality in this country, and we'll be able to have it very, very clear that in fact Mr. X or Mrs. Y owns these properties and these are the rents that they earn. And even the tenants would be able to go in and look at the database and say, but that's not correct. My rent is not 6,000, my rent is 8,000.
Hello.
And there's a self-correcting, self-policing, crowdsourced aspect to the implementation and the enforcement of property tax that is frightening some people. And it's not amusing, it's very, very serious how frightening it is for some people.
It is very
because
frightening.
Because the people who earn rental income, very few of them actually declare it and pay taxes on it.
Tell the truth. I thought FATCA was one thing to get everybody scared, but this is FATCA Local 0.20.
Yeah, you know.
It really is, because it's the transparency that folks ask for, but now that it's going to put into light who owns what is going to be a serious issue. I hear exactly what you're saying. After Raymond is my guest, let us continue on this area of property taxes.
Sure.
You could be fined for not submitting your property tax validation form. Speak to us.
I think it's a $500 fine.
No, they need to increase that.
And I think that is from the 1969 Valuation Act.
Yeah, they need
Valuation of Land Act 1969. It's an ancient fine. Of course, in 1969. Which was 45 years ago? No, 48 years ago in 1969. $500 was a lot different to what $500 is now, and maybe it should be adjusted. But in fact, the other thing I want to put out here, Rennie, for consideration of some of the people who are advocating a stance of protest and non-compliance and so on, is that we work in a system. And from how I understand that system, it works like this. Let's suppose that a particular citizen was part of this protest movement, and they didn't want to complete the papers, and they didn't want to support the new system, and they refused to pay. The sort of axe tax scenario. What you have is a situation where Citizen X, who lives next door to us on Mango Terrace, is a strong member of a particular political party and doesn't pay the money and doesn't fill out the form, and when they come to see the house, he doesn't let them in, and so on and so on. And the position is this: the current situation we have in this country, if Citizen X were to approach his financial institution to borrow money, because some of them have children outside studying, you have medical situations, different things happen in life. It's life. Your business, you need money. You need to produce at least 2 papers for the bank. You need to produce your deed to show the bank that you really do own the property. And one of the papers that the bank requires, from my encounters with the financial institutions, is in fact they would require a copy of your land tax receipt.
That's right.
Because the bank would look upon that correctly, in my view. The bank would look upon that as proof of your having fulfilled your legal obligations.
Right.
And in fact, the property is not one that could be taken away. So therefore,
and even your credit worthiness, they're going to use that as a
to assess it. Yes. Therefore, one is really pondering a scenario where certain political people, some of whom are attorneys and former ministers and so on, are telling people, don't do this and don't fill out that and don't pay this money and so on. And what citizens have got to consider is how do those actions affect their own interests going forward. You know, so these are the sorts of things that we have to bear in mind.
I chuckle only because this is the bigger picture we are watching. Because where I see some people who should know better, who are telling citizens about why they should resist paying property tax, when everywhere in the world folks understand the need for this, because the government does not spend the government money. The government spends money we give to them. Yes. And when I hear people saying to other folks, don't pay your taxes, I go like, well, where is this going? Not only, as I asked Attorney Daly this morning, as far as I'm concerned, if you are encouraging people to break the law, you are complicit in something illegal and should be dealt with accordingly. But getting to exactly what you disclosed this morning, as what is it Mommy used to say, let's use our Trinidad thing here, more in the mortar than the pistol?
Yeah, that's right.
Walla walla bing bang in bay. Anyway, that one may be too old for you.
Yes, I remember.
Okay, so that's what we're talking about. People with other agendas, and folks, I'm very happy that you made that very clear this morning. I'm not saying that everyone who is objecting is in that position, but I am saying that makes it very clear as to why this seemingly irreconcilable objection is so loud. Let us talk about the time folks have, in fact, to challenge validation. So the mass analysis, as you said before, that is done, and you see that the Mango Village thing, your neighbor has got something that's clearly more valuable than what you have. You don't think it is fair here. You want to challenge it. What is the time to challenge it, and how do you go about that?
Well, there are two things. You can challenge an assessment, the first assessment, within your own assessment, within 30 days. But the way the system...
Because the first one is voluntary.
Sure, But the way the system works going forward, at any time, somebody could say, well, in fact, this person has put a swimming pool in their house.
Yes.
This person has put a concrete wall right along their house. This person has put a steel roof. Whatever the improvements are, this person has extended to the west. Or this person has now created a guest house in what was, you could, those reports could be made at any time.
Anything that appreciates the asset, they can come and change the your voluntary information.
Yes. The other thing I wanted to make, I'm glad I'm having this discourse, Rennie, because there's so much to say on it. The other thing I wanted to say is that Section 16 of the Property Tax Act 1990 actually declares, it sets out, stipulates what are the exemptions, and the exemptions are considerable. And in my opinion, in a couple of cases, how can I put it? I would put it as to say that they are doubtful. So, for example, there's an exemption that exists for religious bodies or bodies used for the purposes of religion. Now, I'm not a religious person myself, but I would make the observation that it's some religious bodies have a charitable drive and so on and so on. And in some cases, I mean, we have well-publicized cases. I won't bother to list them here. But in some cases, it kind of closely resembles a business. So there's a difficulty. For me, if you ask me, somebody thinks I have difficulty with the property tax. There's a difficulty with me contemplating a property tax as a revenue-raising instrument in our country, and you're giving religious bodies a free ticket.
Exactly.
The other thing I want to say, the other exemption with which I have a difficulty, and just mentioning it, we have in dialogue on the radio, is the one about educational institutions. So educational institutions are also exempted under Section 16.
But that too is a business.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the olden days, when somebody had a school, or there was a school of typing, or there was a secretarial school or computer science school or something, it was a relatively, it was almost like an act of community giving, and the person may have made some money and so on. But some of these things that we have now, and I think about some of these schools that are foreign-based, the American School and the Maple Leaf School, the British Academy, when I think about some of the places that teach computers and the MBA courses and so on, those are full-fledged businesses.
Yes.
So I have to say, I'm just making my points clear. I have to say that I'm not comfortable. I'm not in the parliament. I can't change anything. I'm not comfortable with the notion that I have to pay a tax.
That disquiet is not only echoed by you. I have heard it from other people too.
I'm just making the point.
And you say if you're doing a charitable business, and then you have your own deduction for that already in the tax system. Yeah. So why should you not pay property tax? And that I have heard also. We have in dialogue. He said. Yeah. I have heard also that when you look at when that information is available, and you see the few businesses and or individual that own so much of the country, it is going to shock a lot of people.
Yes.
Because there are some denominations that, whoa.
Yeah. That's a reality.
And some names that you will come up on and realize that they should name the entire eastern seaboard after them. But then that's a different discussion. I digress. Not really. You have until March 31st to actually pay your property taxes. Of 2018.
Yeah.
All right, so give the notion. The letters are being sent by the post office right now. Folks are having it right now for their voluntary information to go in. Yes.
Yes.
Give me the step after that, right up to the point where they will start facing a penalty
Yeah.
for not either voluntarily submitting this or dealing with the valuation,
Yes,
with,
yes.
with the appeal,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Give me the penalty phase. How much time
Okay.
are we looking at here?
Well, I mean, I think that the valuation return forms have to be submitted by the 22nd of May. Mm-hmm. That is a deadline given in the press advertisements that appeared on the 19th of April.
Right.
And after that, we would have notices of assessment, which are what I would call estimated bills, sent out to customers in 2 to 3 months. Upon receipt of those notices of assessment, I apologize, property owners have 30 days to appeal.
So we assume that if we take the 3 months average, we're into about just the beginning of September,
Yes.
so you've got until the end of September to appeal.
Sure, you have 30 days in which to appeal. And the 30 days in which you appeal, the Commissioner of Valuations has 9 months in which to decide on your appeal. Okay? The property tax itself, if you do not appeal, let's walk through it like a flow chart. If you do not appeal, you are deemed to have accepted the notice of assessment, the estimate. So you didn't appeal and your bill in Mango Terrace was 2,000. You've accepted the 2,000.
Gotcha.
If you did appeal, the Commissioner of Valuations has the right to either request information, invite you to make a submission, or request an inspection. If you refuse to provide the information, or you refuse to allow the inspection, the appeal evaporates. So the appeal process, you're not going to be able to appeal, and then when your information is requested, you don't submit it. You keep the appeal in the system to clog the system up.
Yeah,
so this is just
happen.
another piece of pure mischief people are talking about. The system has actually been structured that, in fact, the only appeals that get to the commissioner for determination are appeals that have been evidenced. So you have made your grounds of appeal clear. I have been to the property and checked. And then we have something to consider. Okay?
Some of the things folks can face, of course, is that the property, in fact, can be taken away from them.
That is one of the possibilities. Yeah.
The other area is, and there are many methods that the state has.
Yes.
Have that they can use. The state has that they can use. If you don't pay by September 15th, I gather next year you pay more. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a sliding scale of penalties of interest and so on that add on. It's a pity that doesn't apply to all the money that's owed to the state. But we'll come to that in the next part of the interview, I'm sure.
Yeah, we get in the midst of Duprey.
Yeah, we get in there just now.
I do want to ask you this, because no part of this here, by the way.
Yes.
I want to be sure I don't cloud it first. No part of this here. So I just want to conclude on the area of the seizure of goods for non-payment. That, in fact, is one of the remedies that is at the hands of the government,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Okay, good. Now let's get to the part about adverse possessor. We're talking about, first of all, starting this from the beginning really quickly, the question of whether those who are squatting illegally on land should be charged. Prime Minister, as you heard me ask of Mr. Daly, which I think makes a lot of sense, Prime Minister say, I'm not going to collect any money from people who are squatting, because to collect any money at all is to validate is to give legitimacy to their occupation. So is there any way the state can extract money from those who are squatting?
Well, in fact, I'm not sure, Rennie. I'm saying this carefully and with the greatest respect. I'm not sure really that is actually my reading of Dr. Rowley's statement. Dr. Rowley spoke on Thursday evening after he spoke to his biography at the Boca Slit. And my understanding of what Rowley was saying was that, in fact, if you, Smith, have a claim before the state that you own this land, well, then you have to pay property tax. The claim will be determined in due course.
I see. While
but
it's
if you,
pending, you pay.
Yeah, if you, Smith, are standing before the court, let's use the word court, to say this property is mine, and I own this lot number 32 of Road Reserve of Las Lomas, blah, 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 and your lawyer has sworn all these papers, well, here what, Smith? You have to pay a property tax.
You're going to pay in lieu of the determination.
Yes. And this is the reason I understood the statement made, I think it was on yesterday's paper, by the former head of the Land Settlement Agency, my former colleague, Dr. Alan Sami. And Dr. Alan Sami actually was issuing a press statement where he was warning. This is how I read Alan Sami's statement. Alan was saying, listen, there is a danger in what Rowley is saying. He was expressing a doubt about what Dr. Rowley was saying in terms of its effect. He said there's a danger in sending people a bill, expecting them to pay. They get a land tax receipt, and then hoping that you could prevail against them in court. Because, in fact, accepting that land tax could be detrimental to the state's case. And I think there's a sort of a gritty logic. These are not things we think about a lot, but in my profession we do. There's a sort of a gritty logic to what Alan Sammy is saying, because ultimately, to put it pithy, if you want to get the property and you have the state in court and you're fighting them, the quickest way to get the property is to go and pay the $1,000 and get the receipt. Okay? And your lawyer has the case. So there's a sort of I am not myself, I'm not an attorney. I mean, I'm a practitioner in the land profession, but I'm not myself absolutely sure which way I would swing on this, and maybe there are other proposals. It's not as if there's only A or B. There may be other approaches to the question, but I certainly think it's something that needs some careful consideration. But that was my reading of Rowley's statement, Rennie. It's not the same as yours.
No, not the same as mine, but I do see the precipitous slope of getting into collecting something, because usually in a general contract, if I pay you rent for something and you accept the rent, you have acknowledged my bona fide status.
Tenancy.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's
on that basis.
Slope,
on that basis, I looked at it. All right. So as far as we're concerned, just to conclude this area of property tax, Afra, because we got to get to Mr. Duprey. This area of property tax here, you are indeed a surveyor. You are evaluating yourself. You're saying that folks don't have to pay anybody for this. It's as simple. It is not as intrusive as it has been touted, and it is going to be a mass analysis of property. And if there are questions, folks will get an adjustment later on if it is felt that they were too modest in the declaration. And even when that is done, they can appeal. Is that a good enough synopsis of what we said this morning?
That's fine.
All right, fantastic.
Thank
we
you.
will keep looking at that. Afra, Raymond, you're here in two areas here. The advocate who stands behind his word. I have to get to this area, Mr. Duprey. We're talking about CL Financial. You said it will be unacceptable if CL Financial is returned to Lawrence Duprey, if he repays the full debt to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I ask you, why is it not fair to return it to him if he repays the total debt to Trinidad and Tobago's government or people?
Well, I think that that's a very pregnant question, Rennie, a very necessary question. And let me start off by saying that the question of the repayment, which is where we have revolving around. The question of the repayment is a very important one. I mean, what are we repaying? The point I'm asking, I'm not being rhetoric or flippant. The point about it is that I have litigated since 2013, March of 2013, to find out exactly what was the money spent on this bailout. Exactly what is the state of the audited accounts of CL Financial. Exactly who received the money in this bailout. And let me say it, that in fact on the 22nd of July 2015, I won the litigation against the Ministry of Finance. And that victory entitled me to receive three things: the audited accounts of CL Financial, the presentation to Parliament in the first half of September 2011 to the independent senators about details of the bailout. It was to get their vote in relation to two laws. And thirdly, the identities of who received money in the bailout and also the dates they were paid. The then Minister of Finance, which was a gentleman called Larry Hawaii, because the People's Partnership was in power, the then Minister of Finance appealed on the 10th of August 2015. Of course, as we all know, a short while later, the People's National Movement won the election. 7th of September 2015, Dr. Rowley's team won the election. I think it was 23 seats out of 41. And they formed the new government, the current government. I was engaged in some kind of an exchange with Mr. Imbert, who's the Minister of Finance. And those discussions did not go as well as we had hoped. And I'm sorry to say that Mr. Imbert, who is the current Minister of Finance under the current PNM administration, has continued the appeal against the release of that information. And that document, the state's substantive appeal, was filed on the 30th of December 2016. It was a Friday, the last working day of last year. And we filed our rebuttal to that on the 10th of March. So we are now in a fight, going down to the wire in the appeal court over the fact that the government of the day, as well as the government before, do not want to give the details of what has happened in this bailout. So, Rennie, a preliminary question is inescapable before we get into any philosophical notion about whether Duprey should get back this or that. a preliminary question, is what was paid out.
What are the facts?
And what's on the table? We can't be discussing dinner unless we know what's on the table.
What is the government's reluctance, which is a continuation of Mr. Hawaii's reluctance, I assume, to this information being disclosed? What is it? I mean, what is the basis they are saying we do not want to hand this information over as the court ordered?
Well, I don't want to speak to somebody else's mind. I will just say, for the sake of information to listeners, that in fact, the Ministry of Finance, in its submissions in December, submitted fresh reasons that had never been brought up before in the High Court. And that is very, very concerning, because as far as I'm concerned, an appeal procedure is meant to be a review of the decision of a subordinate court. In the High Court case, the 3 points that they're bringing up now were never mentioned, because the Ministry of Finance never brought up those 3 points.
Give us the original and the 3 points, please.
Well,
I mean, in a synopsis, I need to find out why they are.
I'm coming to that. Okay. Yes. Let me just give it to you overview. The 3 points were never mentioned. We never rebutted the 3 points. Therefore, the judge, which in fact was Mr. Buru Singh, Sir Ronnie Buru Singh, never mentioned those 3 points in his judgment. So how then could the appeal be considering the judgment of Mr. Buru Singh?
They're introducing a new case and saying that is what they're appealing.
It seems so.
Got you.
But I could give you a synopsis of what it is. So the first case, the one about the accounts. One of the things I had built my case on was a particular affidavit by a former Minister of Finance called Mr. Winston Dukaran, and of the 10th of April of 2012. And Mr. Dukaran swore an affidavit in a court case relating to CLICO, and he gave certain particulars. And the judge reduced it and said, well, in fact, the particulars that Mr. Dukaran used in that affidavit, we would like the Ministry of Finance to produce the background information to that, which was in support of my call for accounts. We are now being told that is, what's the word? Legal professional privilege. It's like an echo of Invaders Bay. The second point, I'm just giving you in summary, without getting into the fullness of it. The lawyers are getting into the fullness of it. The second point, relating to the briefing of Parliament, because in fact the independent senators were briefed by the then Minister of Finance Winston Dukaran and the then Governor of the Central Bank Ewart Williams and some other professionals who accompanied them. They briefed the independent senators in the first half of September 2011 to lobby their support in relation to 2 laws that were going through to support the bailout. I asked, nobody has ever denied that briefing took place. I asked for copies of that briefing. And what is now being invoked for the first time is parliamentary privilege. Section 55 of the Constitution. So we're now being told that the court doesn't have any right to oversee the happenings in Parliament.
Yes.
And the third point, which is about the names of the persons who received money and the dates that the money was received, we are now being told that those, which was never mentioned before, we are now being told that those persons who in fact were possibly people who had held investments and so on, those persons in fact invested under conditions of financial confidentiality, and to reveal that information would breach their confidentiality. So we have a whole fight in our hands. I'm very confident in my attorneys. Their work has been first class, has been excellent work, and we would be in the hands of the appeal court to decide how this goes. It's a hard fight.
The preferred beneficiaries, yes.
Well, there you have it.
Well, all right. From where you sit, what is the best scenario? Your case is enough of a reason to sit on this and wait. But I do want to take it to the point is, if there is a number that is, and I'm really curious about that. Even if there is a number, first of all, if the suit that's what has been appealed right now with you is settled. If they in fact pay all the money back to Trinidad and Tobago, here is my issue. Because of the gravity, because of the massive implications of what happened with CL Financials, are there not laws in the books that where a company has done so much damage in one way or the other, that the principals would be barred from continuing in a business of the same nature? Absolutely.
So this is the point, Rennie, and you're at a very important point in the discussion here. We wrote, and by we I mean myself, David Walker, and our colleague Rishi Maharaj from Disclosure Today, we wrote to the governor of the central bank, a letter that we all co-signed on the 31st of January 2017. And what we said in that letter to Governor Dr. Alvin Hilaire was really in three parts. Let me outline very quickly what those three parts are, because they relate directly to what it is you're touching on, Rennie. The first part we said is that, in fact, the fit and proper regulations, which is to do with who is entitled lawfully to function in a controlling function in our financial institutions, the fit and proper regulations need to be applied. So that was the first point. The second point was that, in fact, under some of the provisions of the Central Bank Act, our reading of those provisions, when you juxtapose them with certain ministerial statements, our reading of those provisions are that the CLICO should be released from the control of the central bank. But in fact, the central bank no longer had the lawful authority to remain in control of CLICO. So the company had to be released. And then thirdly, following from those first two propositions, we have a contradiction to be reconciled. Because in case A, you're saying that the people who originally control the company must not get back in control of a financial institution. And in case B, you're saying that, in fact, the company has to be released from official control. Therefore, case C, which is what the third point we put to Governor Dr. Alvin Hilaire, case C is, what are the proposals to reconcile this contradiction?
Yes.
How can we release this company from central bank control, but at the same time ensure that the original people who caused this mess do not get back in control, so that we can ensure the stability of our financial system? That was our letter that we wrote to the governor on the 31st of January, which is quite apart from the court case. So we put these solid points to the governor. He hasn't replied or acknowledged receipt. And we redelivered it, which was a ceremonial act we did about 7, 8, 9 days ago. And we delivered it to Dr. Hilaire's personal assistant, and we got some coverage from the media and so on. But we are really lobbying, and I'm taking the opportunity here again to call out and to say to the officials in question, namely the governor of the central bank, that the public needs to have some kind of an account or an explanation about what has happened here. This is a very serious matter. It's not going to, we prefer it not be settled in secret or in private, because that's how a lot of the problem developed in the first place.
Not that you need to buttress the fit and proper guidelines, but if it is absolutely necessary, I think we would be well served to look at the statements coming out of Grenada and Barbados and places like that, where CLICO had a devastating impact on the number of people who were affected by it. My brother, as always, it is good to have you here. Your clarity is always appreciated. Your advocacy is encouraged, and it is good that you don't give up that easily.
Good.
Okay, Afra, Raymond, thank you so much for joining us this morning, my friend. Give your website and so on, folks can go up and follow you, because I myself am locked in as a member, and I think folks would do well to be up there.
Sure. Let me just say that the only reason we could have a discussion, Rennie, about returning this empire to Mr. Duprey and his cohort, because we have no clarity in the amount of money owed. The money that was lent, about $25 billion, was lent at less than 1% interest. We have not gone through with a civil lawsuit against Mr. Duprey and his cohort. We have not proceeded with a criminal prosecution of them. And because we failed to do those four things, we could give life to the odious notion that these people need to get back their company. Okay? And I want to say that philosophically, because it's important to philosophize at least once a week, and today is Sunday, so maybe today is the day. Philosophically,
as good as
one could reflect that there's a kind of there's a tinge of the reparations discussion here. Because the reparations discussion is a discussion being conducted and promoted by people of African descent in terms of reparations for the Atlantic slave trade. It's an interesting discussion being advanced.
You are saying a lot of things there, because those who were the preferred beneficiaries of the payout wouldn't fall in the category of...
Yes, well, I come into the point. One of the interesting internal discussions in the reparations movement is the notion, and it's a very troubling philosophical notion, is the question of whether, in fact, a mere financial payment could suffice as good and proper and complete reparations for generations of psychic and economic and social damage.
And that is why...
And this is what we are it is almost like an echo, a bitter echo of the reparations discussion we're wrestling with here in this Clico type situation.
Yes, this is not just about
Could
the
it just
money.
be that a man could write a check and we go back to zero? Is this a game of monopoly or what?
Not only that, I mean, there are some factors here that are frightening, and that's why the fit and proper guidelines must be followed, because it is not so much that you even pay me back as an investor. It is what you stifle from me earning while this madness happened. It is what you did to me financially, and by extension, my children, and by extension.
Yes.
Long discussion. Afra Raymond, thank you, my brother.
Okay, my website is afraraymond.net, and I thank you for the opportunity, Rennie, and viewers and listeners, you all have a great day.